Let this swass out.
Oh, nice. Living in the country, you never know what's gonna sneak into your house.
The container is now open. Once again, Sara Ness and Geof Krum join us for another installment in our Eros series. But this time, we are not talking about romance. Instead, we're talking about red, hot anger. Where does it fit? How can we use it in our relationships? Let's find out together. We also had dangerous insects invading the space during our recording. For Sara Ness and Geof Krum's work, go to authrev.com, where their team offers many classes, including the Authentic Facilitator course that Jonathan and I are currently taking. It's awesome. You should really check it out. Now, here's the second half of our interview with Sara and Geof.
Did you have something on the fire?
Hot fucking anger. Can I say fuck here?
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Fuck yeah.
Anger.
I didn't have a good example of a time that we got hot angry at each other recently. Strangely, it hasn't happened in a couple days.
Couple fucking days.
I don't remember past that.
When you say hot, I think of like sexual
Sexually
anger,
hot.
like hot anger. And maybe there's a overlap, but
Sometimes it's sexual. I think that, like, you're talking about Eros, right?
yeah.
Eros can wrap into almost any part of us, right? You can have sorrowful anger, you can have hot, passionate, angry anger.
I have a conflict scale that goes from abstinence to assault. That's like abstinence, vanilla, switch, kink, and assault. And like you can be at different places on the scale in that. And I'd say Geof like started at kink and I started at vanilla, and like we've kind of moved towards each other. And honestly, I've just gotten to enjoy kink way more. So I'd say we've like, yeah.
Optionality, I think, is like our range has increased on where we can optionally enter into a conflict and where we can allow ourselves to go. And the zone of tolerance and acceptance has definitely expanded. The reason I think it's important to talk about hot anger is that a lot of our communities, probably our shared communities, think of hot anger as being like devolved to like, oh, look at you down there with your yelling,
Right.
short words, elevated voice. And years later, they will be a repressed ball of rage and anger, but with a bunch of unsavory things that they have bypassed and put in a little bottle and then never processed with their partner, with themselves, with the world around them. And eventually, you put enough tokens in there, and it keeps you from connection. Hot anger is really useful. It's a very valid part of who you are as a human being. And I think that permissioning it into a relationship, again, allows depth, right? It allows a range of emotions. You can't look at emotions and say, this one's inconvenient, you can't feel it anymore, it's not welcome in our relationship. The passion that comes behind hot anger can allow, I think, feelings to pass more quickly, full sentiments to be like unleashed into a transpersonal or interpersonal range that can then be unpacked. And I think it's really important to be able to communicate at the level of your feeling.
Is there a fight we're having right now that we could demo? I'm trying to think of anything.
I don't have anything that feels hot right now. Or we try and give you a live demo. But if you're going to invite depth of sorrow or discomfort or disgust into your relationship, I think that it's necessary not to cap anger and rage, which are just as productive and useful. I think that anger is one of the most productive feelings I have because it always wants change, right? It always wants something new. It always wants something else. And so when I'm feeling angry, it's because I want something to change.
We had one actually the other day where it was like, I was feeling just kind of stressed because Geof had been out of work for a couple days. And I was like, I don't want to be upset at you for this, but I feel kind of like abandoned in the project we're doing. And then you had kind of a reaction to that, I think. And we just kind of went back and forth on it for a while.
I don't remember this, but I was also on death's door sick. I had had a fever for 2 days and I was literally raining out of my nose. I don't think that's ever happened to me before. I was like, I was like, no, look, literally it's raining. People say like my nose is dripping. I've never experienced that before. So I don't actually remember that, but it's possible that I got a little angry at Sara feeling resentful of me dying.
Never know what's gonna happen.
But yeah, that would be a situation where I would definitely be like, yeah, I felt angry. And it would be okay that I felt angry. And it would be okay that you felt angry. And then I'm like, yeah, I understand why you're feeling angry. That fucking sucks. Do you want to get frustrated about it?
Yeah, I fucking want to be frustrated about. Yeah, we just like get frustrated when that happens.
I used to toward the
love that
beginning of our
phrase.
relationship, I used to invite Sara into, you angry? You want to tell me how angry you are?
Actually,
You want to yell a little bit?
he actually did this. He would teach me to bring more of my hot anger by like, I would be upset at him, just be like, you want to be more frustrated about that? Like, can you actually get frustrated at me about that? It was
We had a game.
so useful.
It was totally a game at first. And now it's feel the feeling as intensely as you can, as much as you can, and let it move through you.
Mhm.
Yeah, one of the things I'm appreciating about that is that anger as a response can kind of heat you up enough to where you launch into the thing that creates the little rupture that needs to just happen. And then you can rebuild with like, you can come back now that that wave has crested, then you can build what needs to replace what was there and created the anger. And there's a way that like, if you don't just let the top off, you can like kind of tolerate or like, yeah, snuff, like just shove it down a little bit longer. I imagine that's probably why too angry fights often lead to makeup sex, because there is this sense of rupture, and then people are very eager to be like, all right, no more rupture. What's the best way to heal rupture right now? There's like all of a sudden this moment of like, we're not as intimate, let's create intimacy.
And you all are familiar with the existential kink book, right?
Yeah.
It has a quality to that, like the kind of the way that Geof was just down saying like, how angry are you? Like, you know, oh, where is that anger? Like, there's kind of a like bringing it out into the conscious, like into like from deep out into the conscious field. It's like,
Yeah.
It reminds me of that practice.
I will give one I will give one caveat, which is like, I think it only works if you are attuned enough to notice when the other person is actually hitting like an identity trigger or something that really matters to them. Like if one person starts getting activated, not because they're in the conflict, but because they're like in an actually like young, triggered, dysregulated part of themselves, which for me shows up like if my voice starts like rising, if I start crying a little bit, like Geof has started noticing those signs of like, okay, this is a moment to de-escalate and just be with Sara. And I've started noticing like when Geof is like overly agitated or like if he's pacing around, that's like, I need to draw back. So I think that's like my caveat with hot anger is like you have to be able to recognize that overwhelm moment, or you really are going like into assault instead of into kink.
When I spoke earlier about the Sherpa, I have this idea. I need to change that word because I probably can't even use it anymore colloquially. But I have this idea of a guide, right? And all of my emotions are associated with guiding me to something. They're useful, right? They're a compass. They're literally calling my attention to something. Hot anger almost always comes from an internal need that isn't being met, or a clash with an internal identity. And when we hit those identity things, I think it's useful to get the anger out, because what Sara just talked about almost always happens, right? It goes from I'm really, really angry to, oh my God, I'm feeling so sad. And this is the thing that was underneath that anger. And there it is. Now we need to stop and we need to care for that. We need to explore this thing. Because sometimes it just ends with the hot anger. It just, I need a pressure release. But oftentimes it's the anger is trying to show us something that we're not seeing. And when we get to that point, it's like, oh, here we are. We need to stop. We need to slow down, get curious, care for it, and see if there's something we can do here.
Which is where you get the necessity for being able to hold multiple perspectives and code switching that we talked about at the beginning. I heard this phenomenal example. So one project we're working on right now is writing a course on how to create in-person community, which I'm sure you guys are familiar with that, whole area of how do you do this thing. And I was doing some research on it, and there's this guy, Scott Peck, he wrote this book, The Different Drum, and he talks about an exercise that he does with communities that want to learn a certain type of resilience, where the facilitator will set a timer for 15 minutes, and he'll be like, who is experiencing a feeling about something. And people will start talking, and somebody will start getting deep into their emotions, and they'll be crying. The timer will go off, and the facilitator will go, okay, now we're going into doing our finances. And you just got to switch on a dime, and the whole group has to start figuring out their financial reality together for 15 minutes. So the timer goes off, the facilitator goes, okay, now back into emotions. And after a while, you can get so good at that switch that they would go back into emotions, and the same person would just immediately start crying again.
Whoa.
In authentic relating and circling, sometimes we privilege emotions so much, but emotions, they kind of stick around. Like, you're still gonna have the same feeling and same experience. So learning in relationship to be able to say, pause, there's something more important than my feeling right now, or your feeling right now. Like, my kid is crying, or we need to eat something because we've been fighting for 2 hours, or we should really just take a walk. Like, I think that's actually really essential for healthy relationship and healthy conflict. And it's same thing is, if you're in hot anger and the other person gets really triggered, it's only safe to be in hot anger if you actually know how to de-escalate.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'm appreciating that all of these practices feed into each other. There's like a way that, like, the more we go into intense emotions, and the more that we learn how to trade off emotion time to like practical time, the more we're able to trust ourselves with bigger and bigger, higher stake emotions and conversations. And then that kind of creates the muscles that allow something like hot anger can be it allows it to be productive rather than, I think in a lot of romantic relationships, hot anger leads to things like physical abuse and other forms of like, there's like a shadow side to it for sure. And that there's a way that like, the answer isn't then to eliminate being honest about anger, or like just eliminating anger as a valid experience. It's like the answer is actually give more to it. That's kind of what I'm resonating with. I wonder how much that tracks with y'all's experience.
Yeah, I think so. I think it's person dependent too. It's about how much do you align to your partner's style of anger and communication and conflict, and how much can you honor it. Because I think one of the most corrosive things in relationship is making the other person wrong, instead of going, wow, this is not something I prefer. So like, how do we workshop it together? Do we need to? How does that happen over time? Can we try some experiments? I think experiments are the most useful thing in relationship, because instead of you need to change this, it's like, what would happen if we tried this thing for a while? Like, what do you actually imagine? Like, an example of this, I'm a big believer in solving things through environment instead of through personality. So example, like, I was upset at Geof for a long time because he wouldn't like complete tasks in the time period that I wanted them completed. And it had an impact. What? It's true. Me.
I'm not glaring at the screen, Sarah.
Oh, fine. It's also about like ignoring your partner's emotions, like we talked about it a bit ago. Anyways, Geof wouldn't get things done in the time period that I wanted, and or get things done that were like on his list, and it would sometimes have an impact. And for a long time, I was just like, why can't you do this? Like, I'm upset at you. And I was just like kind of blaming him and being like, this is a personality thing. Like, you're just not working hard enough. And then eventually I was actually like, okay, let's take some time to sit down, explore, why is this happening? And it turned out that one of the big problems was like just sheer energy level. And so we did a lot of work around like what things could help with that. How do we work with Geof seasonal depression? Like, what expectations do I have? What medications might help? And then the other part was just tracking. And so I was like, cool, like, how about if we take one morning a week and I'll sit down with you and we'll just organize a sauna and we'll do that together. And that has worked really well. I really honestly haven't noticed, I haven't had a problem with it since, which is pretty amazing. But it took me stopping being a bitch about it basically, and like putting all the like motivation on him to change and going like, how do I help? What situational factors are causing this? How do I address it without shaming him?
The opposite side of that coin was Sara was always anxious.
Mhm.
She had high anxiety about absolutely everything in our work relationship, unrealistic expectations about what timelines things got done on, and an internal list of prioritization that didn't match with mine, and then felt resentful for me, to me, at me, for not meeting those internal expectations and stories and knowing exactly what her prioritizations are and that mine didn't match up. And that was really frustrating. It made it very hard to work and feel good about the contributions that I was making in our work life and the contributions that I was making in our home life and the contributions I was making to our relationship at large. And at times it felt like on top of all of those things, she was getting really angry at me for the neurodivergence that I have had my entire life and have been diagnosed with since long before she met. And that was really hard. And we tried to fix it a couple of different ways, but it was a recurrent problem, right? And this pattern emerged, this thing happening. And we sat down together and went, how can we address this? And it's been a cycle because Sara does have a need to track everything. And I come from a background where I was the person holding everything for 300 employees.
Mhm.
And now we have a team of like 5. And I'm just like, you need to relax. And I can't say that because that's not correct. It's not she needs to relax. It's we need to find a way to productively work together with the dispositions that we have and the strengths and the weaknesses, the assets that we have inside of both our working relationship and our partnership.
One of the things you did that was really helpful on that was like, you told me directly, hey, you are giving a lot more negative feedback than positive, and I need more appreciations. And before that, I'd just been like, I don't know how to stop being anxious. Like that is not a good like metric for me, but I think know how to give appreciations. And so I actually put a task on my Asana that says only appreciate Geof. And I think I've gotten a little better since then. I've been really trying.
I don't know about better.
Okay.
It's different. There's more appreciation. I don't know whether or not there's actually less negative evaluative feedback. And it's hard to tell because negative evaluative feedback lives significantly longer in our memory than positive affirmation does.
Yeah.
By default, it's a coded psychological response for all people. And Sara's very particular about things. So even when things are done amazingly, there's always constructive feedback. And so it can be hard sometimes to hold on to the positive affirmation that I receive because those points of negative evaluation just live longer in my system. And so it's something that, again, we're still juggling. We're juggling with it after working together for 4 years.
It's a little hard to hear that maybe you've made more changes than I have on it. It makes me want to keep workshopping it.
It's always reassuring to know that you're willing to meet me in the middle, or find a way that we can productively and helpfully work toward feeling good in contribution and partnership. It's okay. I love you where you are. If you don't change, I'll still love you. It's just hard sometimes.
I'm appreciating getting to see one of these processes in the middle. Yeah, I'm just appreciating to see that glimpse.
Welcome.
It reminds me of a similar dynamic that we've noticed recently around or noticing that finding the ways that we can use our own strengths to help what we see as the deficit in the other is like, it's like a duh moment, like I don't tidy up as well, and Jonathan really does. And so it's like, oh, I can use my ability to do that to support, rather than to like wish it wasn't happening this way. And like, I'm terrible at or like giving directions or keeping up with where we're going. So just implementing, using an app to do that when we get in the car. I don't know, just little things that can grow and get bigger. It's like, oh, we can workshop this, we can find like how we each have strengths and use those to our advantage. I mean, yeah.
I like to say that Geof is the house husband and I'm the secretary.
But I know also we recently interviewed Amy Lee Curry, and she brought up her experiences with polyamory, and that got a lot of interest. I think a lot of people right now are interested in polyamory, and something Sai and I have noticed is a lot of conscious couples thinking goes on in the polyamory community in a way that I think like thinking about monogamy, it kind of lags behind. And I'm curious if you two would be willing to talk about your journey with polyamory and your thinking about it, because in this Eros series, trying to be more mindful about our sexual connections, there seem to be just a whole lot of topics in there that people want explored and to understand.
Definitely your expertise.
It's so much.
Broad question.
It's a really broad question, and I'm going to give you an opportunity to refine that a little bit, and here is why. I ran an international kink education company it was international for 3 years, and it was stateside for like almost 10 off and on. In addition to that, I have my entire adult life has been lived in various forms of E&M and polyamorous relationships. So I have quite a bit of experience. I do coaching in the relational field as well. So there's a lot that I can bring here, and I want it to be, with the time that we have, as useful as possible. And I also would love to frame it around something that you have contributions for as well. So I'm wondering, is there like anything particular that you'd love for us to speak on?
I think maybe narrow framing it in you two as human beings together, like having some opening the door to polyamory, how the mind frame that the relationship took on to take that shape. What was that journey like, stepping into that together as you two people?
I think it might actually be useful to have you start.
Okay. Yeah. When Geof and I got together, the one downside that I had in dating him was that he was poly. Because I was coming out of a lot of like not great poly relationships. But he addressed it so beautifully that it really made me aware that it wasn't, I'd always blamed it on my partner. I was like, they're not doing poly well enough. And with Geof, it became very clear that like it was me that was not kind of able to figure out around it. And I'll say in a minute how we ended up figuring out something that worked. But I think two of the things Geof did really well. Number one, he went really slowly with it. And he taught me the difference between limits and boundaries. So before I'd been like, how much can I be okay with in poly? Like, well, if I'm not in an active trauma reaction, we can go up till that point. And Geof really asked me a lot, well, no, but what do you want? Like, what is the boundary that goes beyond your actual desire? And it turned out that was like very small. It was like, what?
That was really confusing for me.
What
you just said.
Oh, do you want to clarify it?
In service of people who think a little bit more like me, and told exactly where you are. Cool. There's a differentiation, it felt like, in Sara's orientation to polyamory, which looked previously like this is how much hurt I'm willing to undergo so that my partner can explore what they want.
Ooh,
And
yeah.
the reorientation that we had was, hey, Sara, where is your fuck yes in this?
Right.
What do you want to do? What looks good? What can we try out? There's a whole world of possibilities out here. And sometimes we're going to run into them, right? And then we're going to make boundaries around that. If this happens, then I will, which is self-empowerment, as opposed to that hurts. And so we were able to start designing requests and desires around that thing. And it took a long time for Sara to be able to find her voice again, to be able to find her desire, to be able to find her fuck yes.
Yeah.
And that empowerment was just not there.
Geof did a lot of slowing down, a lot of kind of refusing to step forward unless I was able to find a yes to it. And that was extremely empowering. It really built me up to the point where he could start to have outside relationships and I could start to explore outside relationships just in the last like 2 years. And he also, like, we both, something that helped was we were both very clear that we understood why the forms of relationship we wanted were so important to the other person. And we were like, I will not break up with you about this. Geof was like, if I have to be monogamous to be with you, it may be hard for me over time, but this is not a relationship ender. And I was like, I will not ask you to be monogamous with me because I know how big of a part of you that will be giving up. So it was like putting each other's happiness primary felt like it really helped me to relax around like, okay, I have to choose this. Like, this is not Geof doing something to me. This is me making a choice. And Geof is really like being there fully. And eventually what we've discovered that was actually really powerful is that, like, you know, we use the word jealousy to refer to a lot of things in poly. And actually, when I started really looking into it, I was like, okay, what's actually happening for me is a fear of being left out and being abandoned. It's not a fear that Geof's going to break up with me. It's not a fear profoundly that someone's going to be better than me. It's a fear, it's just a discomfort of being out of the room and knowing that there's intimacy happening without me there. So eventually what we tried doing is dating somebody together. And a couple months ago, we found an absolutely incredible human that we've both very much fallen in love with. And I don't get the same triggers. Like, they're incredibly emotionally intelligent. We talked about all the triggers ahead of time. We've been able to negotiate different things, even that feel scary. And we can all be there together. And I just don't get that jealousy trigger. Does that feel accurate to you?
For the most part, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I want to make a distinction and clarification here, because there's low resolution around a lot of the words that we're using right now. And I want to provide higher resolution so that those words don't become 4-letter words that mean literally anything. So I'm polyamorous, polyamoring, and polyamorland. So, I think one of them is just polyamory in general. I have a deep-seated belief that every healthy human being is polyamorous. And I want to qualify that. Every healthy human being that I know loves more than just one person. And they love all of them in distinct ways. And there are classes of that love. There are friends that you love. There are collaborators that you love. There are family members that are loved. There are children that you love. Let's not go too far down that road. And then there are partners that you love. And you love them in a number of different ways. I have this whole bucketing system that I'm not going to talk about right now. But monogamy tends to restrict a few specific ways that we're not allowed to love other people. And they tend to be romantic and sexual. You're not allowed to romantically and you're not allowed to sexually love or at least indulge in relationship with another person. And Sara was having a really hard time with the sexual part of non-monogamy. And there was a lot of trauma around that and healing that we explored and played with. I, again, feel staunchly that everyone is polyamorous to some degree in healthfulness. And I have been a practicing non-monogamist, consciously practicing non-monogamist since I was 16, 15. And I identify to an extent with both that sexual and relational orientation. So when Sara said, when Sara said that I said, I'd be willing to be monogamous, to be in relationship with you, a differentiation that I would make is I would be willing to practice monogamy to continue to be in a relationship with you. I would still be a polyamorist. And I think it was about that point that Sara realized, like, oh, this is a part of who you are. This is never going to change. And to be in a practicing monogamous relationship is a significant restriction on who you are as a person. Because I don't know how to not be romantic with my friends, right? And Sara loves to cuddle people. All of these things to me are a spectrum of non-monogamous but polyamorous expression of love. And it's a philosophy of connection that I hold very dear to myself. And while, sexual monogamy is maybe the least restricting of those, honestly, and it's still important to me, but it's the least restricting of those.
Yeah, well said.
Yeah, that's a beautiful.
So beautiful. I noticed I'm like leaned in, and when I have conversations with people about polyamory, I find myself like tensing up and constricting and like thinking of all like trauma and things that that feel unsavory or something. And instead, as you're describing this, I'm just like, yeah. So yeah, I appreciate that share, because it really just opened my mind in a way that was unexpected.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. It makes me want a lot more content and time from you guys, which is a segue.
Obviously.
I loved that look right there. That made me so happy.
So I know the listeners right now are wanting to find more of the stuff you guys do. Where can they find you? How can they get more thinking from you guys and content?
Well, listeners, we have a website. Our website is authrev.org, so short for Authentic Revolution. And we have a class coming up that we're teaching called The Art of Difficult Conversations. So really good if you want to have conversations about poly or conflict, difficult talks with your boss or your collaborators or your partner or whatever.
Or kids.
Yeah.
Your parents.
We'll talk about lots of different topics, like tactical communication skills, a little bit about power dynamics, making resolutions, setting boundaries. So that starts May. There's a US Asia cohort, Asia Australia, starting May 7th, and then there's a US EU cohort, just in terms of time zones. You can take it wherever, starting on June 11th, I believe. Yeah. And then I have a Substack where I write a lot about these topics. If you look up Authentic Revolutionary on Substack.
Oh yeah, I'm subscribed to your Substack actually.
Yay. Yeah, I wrote one this morning on how to address the elephant in the room.
And we just
one
talked about that. It's very Substack this morning.
Awesome. Yeah.
And I have a Substack that I have been really, really horrible at posting to.
And yet writing beautiful things for.
Yeah, I have like 10 articles or so that I need to post. I need to.
We'll circle you on that another time.
That's been for me. I hate well, we won't talk about it, but I also have a Substack that you guys can check out. Something that I want
Das Geof on Substack.
Something that I want to highlight about the Art of Difficult Conversations coming up, specifically relevant to this discussion that we're having in Eros and about polyamory, is that in all of the relational coaching that I've done over the years, the single largest contributor to shallowness in relationship, longevity of relationship, and success in relationship is how you engage with conflict. 100%. And there's a whole institute, the Gottman Institute, that says the exact same thing. Learning to engage in healthy conflict inside of any relationship in your life, but most specifically in your partnered relationships in your life, is deeply important to having fulfilling relationships. And I know that the tools that I was afforded as I was growing up were anemic at best, and completely destructive at worst.
Mhm.
Great
So
examples of what not to do.
Right.
Yeah.
and we don't even know that because we still default to them. We're still reactionary. And so I think that anyone taking the time to afford themselves more optionality and responsiveness and resilience inside of difficult conversations is your personal responsibility to showing up in fullness in relationship. And so I invite all of this community to show up and explore with us.
Mhm. Oh, and we also do fight labs, and these are free events that happen every Friday from 12 to 1:30 Central. And those are places that like you can come and you can just practice difficult situations. And they alternate between a facilitation fight lab where you can practice tough like leadership group situations and a one-on-one or one-on-two fight lab where you can come and role play interpersonal situations. So fun option. And all the programs also have like low, middle, high income options. So we try to make it accessible for everyone, and the fight labs are free.
Awesome.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. Thank you guys so much for coming on The Container.
Yeah.
We're so grateful.
Well, thanks for holding and supporting The Container for us.
This was the first interview we've gotten to do together. So it felt really special. Thank you so much for inviting both of us on.
Yeah. Thanks for being here.
The Container is now closed. If you'd like to support the work we do, and I know you want to support the work we do, go to thecontainerpod.com, where you can find links to subscribe to the podcast, join us on the YouTube. The YouTube is awesome. There's shorts, there's clips, there's all the videos of our different episodes, and find us on social media. We have an awesome Facebook group going, The Container, Circling and Authentic Relating, and you can also check out our Patreon, where you can become a patron with a little teeny weeny donation each month to support all this amazing work. To get more of Sara Ness and Geof Krum, you can subscribe to their Substacks. The Authentic Revolutionary is Sara, and Geof is Das Geof, DASGEOF. They have some really great work, some really great articles on there. Check it out. They also host these fight labs every other Friday from 12 to 1:30 Central. You can find links on social media. You can find links on authrev.com for those. It's a really cool little container they create to workshop difficult situations that may occur while facilitating or in any kind of community group that you might be a part of. And as always, we have a really nice way of closing. Keep it namaste.
Thank you.